All right. There seems to be some confusion on the classes and whatnot. So, and how to refer to individual things within a class and whatnot. So, I made this video to kind of go over all that kind of stuff. So, we have a class, right? We called it student. I have a first, last name, GPA, and a self generating email. Okay. And I read that in to a list. So I'm basically reading that into a list. So let's see, first of all, let's see what does that really look like. So I have student data is a list, and each list is just a object in a class, or really just a collection of data. So each field is an object in a class is what they call it. But think of it as like just a collection of data that belongs together, right? So for example, student data 0, I had Nolan Thomas 3.65 and I have an email address. So I have a first, last GPA email. Student data 1 was Alessandra Volta, first, last GPA and email. Student data 2, George Washington 3.46 G Washington at PUHSD. So if I want to refer to anything within that, so I can search through that list if I want to, right? So let's say I want to search for Alessandra Volta, right? So how do I go about that? So basically when I want to refer to that, it's going to be student list dot last name. So if I want to look all the way through the list, for example, for Volta, I would go for I in range. I'm gonna write it nice. And then length of student list. Yeah. So for I in range length of student list, that would go through the entire list. And then if I want to look for a specific last name, I would go if student list I dot last. So basically, if, should I write this nicer? Yeah, okay, I'll write this nicer, guys. I'm gonna get rid of these two so you can see it better. Okay, so I'll go in, let's say I want to look for a certain name. I'll go for I in range length student list. So that's basically going to go through the whole list. If I want to look for stuff within the list, there's no such thing as just student list, because each one of these items has 4 different fields. So I got to specify what kind of field I'm looking for. So again, let's say I want to look for a last name. I want to find Volta, right? So I'll go if small I, if student list I dot last. So the field in student list somewhere, as it goes through, the last name field within that. If that equals Volta, what do I want to do? Maybe say, hooray, I found Volta. He is in position 2, or whatever I want to do. So does that make sense? So I have the entire list. Each item in the list consists of 4 different things. So again, if I'm looking at this field, that would be student data 1 dot first, student data 1 dot last, student data 1 dot GPA, student data 1 dot email, or student data bracket 1 dot email. So each item in the list has 4 different fields. So I'm going to go through like my program up to a sort and kind of explain what's happening. So hopefully it'll make more sense to you. And then we're going to do another program that uses the same concept. So again, you have a chance to practice them once more. So now I go in right here, and let's start from the beginning. So I have my student data, bam. I have my class defined right here. So you might have used some different names, right? So I have a student class. I have the the definition init, self, first, last name, and GPA. So basically all this is saying is I can pass three things into this class. I can pass a first name, a last name, and a GPA. First, last, GPA. And then it self-generates the email right here. So it really has 4 fields, but I'm only passing 3 of them in because one is self-generated. All right. I'm going to go down to the bottom really quick so you can see. On the main part of my program, I have student list equals bracket, bracket. And that basically just goes in and creates a blank student list. And eventually it's going to be of a bunch of student fields. All right. So I'm going to work. I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to go through each one of my different things. So for a new student, right? So I'm entering a new student in. So I go, I define new student is going to be the way my function. I'm not passing anything into it. So I'm going to have first input the first name. You guys also like error check the name. I'm going to have last input into the last name, GPA. And then I'm telling it that it's going to be expecting a float, which is a decimal number, enter the GPA. And then I go S1 equals, and it could be any name. I'm just using S1. Student, because that's the name of my class, first, last, GPA. Because again, student, if I go up, student is my class, and I'm going to pass first, last, GPA into it. So I'm passing first, last, GPA into the student. And then to get it into the list, so basically now that becomes that S1 is that record basically containing these things. I go student list.append S1. So whatever list I have, it adds these items to the end of the list. So I hope that makes sense. That's how I append into the list. That's how I add a new thing into the list. So that's a new student. All right. Then I'm going to go in the start of the class. When I start the program, I'm going to go in and I'm going to read these names so I don't have to enter them every time. So check it out. This is what I'm doing when I'm reading them. So I have a function called import students. So whenever I say import students, it's going to go run this code, and it's going to basically open my student data file to read it. So it's going to go into this file, and it's going to go in and it's going to read this file. Remember, we have a whole video that explains how this works. So you can watch that video again, explains it in a little bit more detail. So it reads the whole file into a variable called content. Then I close the file. So basically I open the file and I dump all the data into a variable named content. And then I close my file. And content, you don't have to use content, it's just anything. Then I'm going to go in, and we talked about this later on. I'm going to go in and I'm going to replace the blank spaces with nothing. So if I go in, that's going to be, see, before cap, that's a blank space, for example. It replaces them with nothing. And then in this case, I'm going to replace the new lines with a comma. Because right now, I can see I have a field, comma, field, comma, field, new line. So when I read it, it'd be easier to, like, every field is separated by a comma. If I had one item per line, you could separate them by a new line. But in this case, I'm going to separate them by a comma. So I just basically replace all the new line with a comma. And then I basically I have a content dot split on a comma. So it takes all the data that I have and it splits it into separate items in a comma, and I put that into like a variable called content list, which will be like a long string. So check it out. I haven't used student data yet. So now I have a long list of basically a string um, of all my different items in there. And now I'm going to put them into my student list. So if you look at it, I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So all my data is arranged in groups of 3, right? First name, last name, GPA, first name, last name, GPA, first name, last name, GPA. So I go in now, I have a loop, I'm going to run it from 0 to the length of the content list. So how long this variable was. And again, this is not student list. I'm going to read it into the student list, just an arbitrary name. And again, watch the video on reading stuff into a file, and it shows you in detail what's in the content list, and so on. So I'm going to read it from the 0 item, which is the very first item in the list, to the end of the list, and I'm going to go every third item because it's first last GPA, first last GPA. Check it out. S1 is going to be student, and then really what I want to have, if you remember from up here, I had student, first, last, GPA. But as I read it in that list, the 0 item is I, right when I start, I plus 1, I plus 2. Then it starts over again, the next iteration, I plus 1, I plus 2. So I go in and I go content list I. That's going to be the first name. Content list I plus 1. It's going to be the last name, comma float content list I plus 2. That's going to be the GPA. So I basically take that and I create this variable called S1 that basically is a new object in my class. Okay. And then I go in just like I did if I inputted it from scratch. I go in and it goes student list dot append S1. So this line reads the file into the individual kind of spaces in the content list. Into the student class. And then I'm going to go in and display it afterwards. I'm going to go over my display here as we get to it. So that's going to be that's the import student function that I have. As I go down, display the entire class. So to display it, I print a blank line just so it looks nice. I format my text, and then I have headers. Whenever I do it, I'm always just guessing what these numbers are, and then I go back and rearrange them, kind of make them smaller and bigger depending on how it looks. So if I have that, it's going to print the headline, and then to basically go in and read it back to print it, right? I go for in range length student list. And now I'm going to print 4 different fields. So it's expecting 1, 2, 3, 4 different fields. So as it goes through the list from in range length of student list, it's going to be student list I dot first, student list I dot last, student list I dot GPA, student list I dot Gmail. So again, if I go in and I'm printing it as I go through the list, I is 0, print student list 0 dot first, student list 0 dot last, student list 0 dot GPA, student list 0 dot email. Then I becomes 1, print student list 1 dot first, student list 1 dot last, student list 1 dot GPA, student list 1 dot email, and so on till the end of the list. So that's essentially how we address different items in a list. Bam. So that's the print statement. That's going to print it out. And then I print a blank line just so it looks nice. So that prints the entire line. For sorting it is going to be when it's going to make sense basically on why are we using lists. So when I call a sort, it's going to ask, do you want to sort by GPA or by last name? So if I sort by GPA, remember I have the two, and this comes back from the sort program to do the heap sort that we did. I have a nested loop that goes through. Basically, I'm going to put the biggest one at the start of the list in the inner loop, and then the outer loop, it keeps doing that till we're on done. So I basically go in the nested loop. If the student list i.gpa is greater than student list j.dpa, so the two iterations of the loop, then I'm going to switch them. And see, this is where like the class comes in good. So remember, this is the specific way that I can switch in Python only. Student list bracket I, comma student list bracket j equals student list bracket j, comma student list bracket I. So it switches the entire record in. So if I was doing that manually, I would need to switch student list I dot first, then student list I dot last, then student list I dot GPA, then student list I dot email. But because it's a class, all I need to do is basically switch the whole kind of class object, and it switches all 4 items in it. So that would be how to sort this. And then I do the same by name. And check it out. Here it has the greater than sign, so it sorts it largest to smallest. Here I have the smaller, so it alphabetically would sort like A's before Z's. So this is the sort right here. So the main program, so in my main program, all it does, it has a loop. So again, I say answer is equal nothing, because my program is going to repeat until I say Q for quit, and it's going to give me an answer. It's going to give me an error if I didn't define answer right here. So I have student list equals bracket bracket. So it basically defines my student list. We talked about that. And then the first thing I do, I call import students, which again, as I go up to import students, reads all these students from my file. So like the very first thing I do is I call import students, going to go up and basically import all of the students from my file into my list, into my student list. Then I'll go while answers not Q for quit. I'm going to ask, what do you want to do? Do you want to input? Do you want to display? Do you want to sort? Or do you want to quit? If I go input, then I go up to new student. And remember, new student just went in. It asked for the first, last, and GPA, and then I appended it into the student list. If I go in and go D, I'm just going to display the list, and that just goes up and runs display list. I also, if you remember, after I imported the student, I automatically displayed it. So I could have, again, I could have gone and import student. When I started, I could have gone display right here. And then sort the list, I go sort it, and then I display it. So if I run my program, bam, so it automatically imported them from the list, and then I displayed them already, right? Okay, let's import a new. So I have Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris, is he pretty smart? Sure. 4 point. I'm trying to make him not the best. Okay, we'll make him 3 point something. 3.67. Whoa, 3.67. 3.67. Damn. So now let's display it and see if Chuck Norris, it's in the end of the list, right? So now I'm going to sort it based on GPA or last name. Let's do by GPA, G. So Alexandra Volta has the highest GPA. Chuck Norris has the third. Ooh, he ties with Nolan Thomas. Johan Johansson, not a good driver, has uh, 0.34. If I sort it again, this time on last name, which is an N, then I go in and see it sorts the lowest by last name. D is the lowest, and Washington is the highest. And then finally, I'm going to do a queue to quit. So I hope that kind of explains that program a little bit more. I'm going to be gone this upcoming week. I might be here tomorrow. We're going to have a program that practice these skills. I have a video that talks about it. And then when we come back, we're going to revisit this program, and we're basically going to add a save function that writes the list. Now we added Chuck Norris, so it writes that back into the to the text file. And then we're also going to learn how do you delete items out of the text files. So I hope that this kind of explained things a little bit better.